The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
Hi, welcome to Durian ASEAN, the ASEAN Breakfast Call. For today, we have Elaine Gunn. She is a lawyer as well as a member of Myconsti. Today, she's going to talk about the power of the executive in the federal government. Welcome to our office in our studio in Durian ASEAN.
Hi, Arlene.
Yeah. So first of all, before we go about and all the details on the executive, I just want to know what is actually an executive.
The executive is one of the branches of the, I would say, government, which deals with the day-to-day affairs of this particular country. Now, the executive will consist of 5 branches. Number 1 will be the Council of Rulers. The second one will be the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Thirdly, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the Public Services.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I see. So, what do they do?
They run the day-to-day business of the government. In a nutshell, that is what they do.
I see. So, when you talk about the day-to-day business of the government, what is actually the specific role, like all these different minister and prime minister they do?
As you know, the legislature will make laws, and what the executive will do is they will take these laws and then they will execute the day-to-day functions of the government based on the laws made by the legislature, in a nutshell.
But do they also make laws?
They do actually. If the legislature provides that under this particular act, the executive is entitled to make subsidiary legislations, they can actually do so.
So, talking about the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, what is the role of this Yang di-Pertuan Agong or the Conference of Rulers?
In this country, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, you can call him the constitutional monarch. In a nutshell, he is the supreme head of the federation. Now, he is also the head of Islam in his home state. For example, let's say, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong for this term is Terengganu. He is the head of Islam in Terengganu and also Malacca, Penang, Sabah and Sarawak, and also the federal territories. So, he is also the supreme commander of the armed forces as well. But mainly his role is purely ceremonial, as opposed to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong really vesting his authority in the executive, because his role, or rather his powers, are exercised through the Prime Minister and also the Cabinet. Yes.
I see. Very interesting. Talking about the Cabinet, right? Just now you mentioned. So what is actually the role of the Cabinet? I know the Cabinet is appointed by the Prime Minister, but what do they do, and how many ministers that we need in the Cabinet?
Actually, the Cabinet consists of all the ministers appointed by the Prime Minister and is the highest policy-making body in the Federation. Now, these ministers, they will run and control the functions of the various ministries that govern the country, as what I told you just now. If I'm not mistaken, there are about 39, if I'm not mistaken, 39 ministers in this country for the moment. And they are supposed to be elected by the Rakyat, because the Prime Minister, when he elects these ministers, he must elect from the Dewan Rakyat. And the Dewan Rakyat, the member of parliament of the Dewan Rakyat is elected by the Rakyat. So in a way, actually, the highest making policy branch of this country is actually elected by the Rakyat.
I see.
Yeah.
But if the person is a Senate, meaning elected by the Prime Minister himself, can the Senate be a minister as well?
Yes, he can. Provided the Prime Minister elects him.
I see.
Yes.
The Cabinet themselves, how many ministers that we need in the Cabinet actually? Because if I'm not mistaken, we have quite a number of ministers, like 39. But in other countries, I think it's not that many. when it comes to key ministry, is it the decision of the Prime Minister to decide, like, I want to have like 39 ministries?
So far, the number of ministers will vary.
Mm-hmm.
I think last year we have the last term we had about 30, 32 or 33. But I think this year the portfolio, there were some changes in the portfolio, and I think there was an increase, if I'm not mistaken. But other countries, I believe in England, they have more than 30 over. So I think it depends on the size of the country.
I see.
Yes, and it also depends on many other factors which I'm not able to answer. But I believe in our country, the number of ministers is actually adequate. The question is whether they are doing their job.
That's another topic to go
Yes.
through. What is actually the Prime Minister's role?
The Prime Minister's role, he is the head of the government, and he is also the one who is appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. And basically, he is the head of the cabinet in a nutshell. He is the head of the people and the head of the cabinet and a representative of the country.
So as a Prime Minister, as the head of the government, what is the role that the Prime Minister usually would do on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, he probably go for visitations and countries. But I believe under the constitution, he is supposed to advise the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on many, many things. Because as I explained just now, the executive authority is actually vested in the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, in which he exercises it through the Prime Minister and also the cabinet ministers. So I think the major function of the Prime Minister is to advise the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. For example, the appointment of 44 out of 70 senators, and then the summoning and adjournment of the sittings of the Dewan Rakyat, and the appointment of judges of the superior courts as well. He will actually have to advise the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and the Yang di-Pertuan Agong will in turn elect these people based on the Prime Minister's advice.
What about tabling laws and policy? For example, the budget. It is the role of the Prime Minister to sort of like table certain key policies and budgetaries. Is that the case?
Yes. But I think also because our Prime Minister holds the portfolio of Finance Minister as well.
I see.
Yes. So I believe it is because of this, he is also tabling the budget.
So actually, in essence, that his role is more on heading the whole cabinet. It's not so much on like the one that you usually would see. Like for example, he also provided some of his comments or views during the press conference of the MH370.
Definitely, because he is the representative of the people. A Prime Minister's role, I believe it permeates through the whole system. Yes, he is the people's leader. That is why you see him everywhere. And that's why he gives statements on every single important issues.
I see. So is the executive accountable to the parliament?
The executive is accountable to the parliament, definitely. Yeah, because the ministers, how the parliament exerts control over the minister, it is during question time. Because the ministers are members of the parliament as well. So definitely they are answerable to the parliament. So it's during question time where you can actually question this minister, what have you been doing, what is your portfolio?
But they can only question the conducts of the Prime Minister, but can they charge the Prime Minister?
Charge the Prime Minister? I believe there's also a concept, ministerial responsibility concept. So actually, if the minister is not doing his job, or rather he is no longer commanding the confidence of the rest of the people, he's supposed to resign. Yes. So let us take that example.
Yeah.
That example, for example, the ferry incident in South Korea, and you juxtapose it with our MH370. Now, in Korea, the Prime Minister actually offered to resign. But in Malaysia, basically no one is taking responsibility. So this is one thing we have to ask ourselves, whether ministerial responsibility is it available in this country or not. So this is a way where that is how ministers are responsible towards the parliament and also the people.
And actually, prime ministers and his cabinet are not above the law, right? They
No,
can
they
be
are not.
charged under the judiciary as well if they are found to be committing certain crimes or
Yes,
not
definitely.
not having a good conduct on their role.
Yes, definitely.
Mhm.
In fact, even the Yang di-Pertuan Agong can be charged in the special court, and that is
Mhm.
provided for in the federal constitution. So no one is above the law, because the federal constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Like, for example, in Thailand right now, Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, she's being charged by the judiciary in Thailand for
Yes.
some of her misconduct during
Yes.
her years as a prime minister. In Malaysia, would that happen? Would this kind of situation be happening?
Theoretically, it can happen,
Mhm.
but practically, I can't answer.
I'm just wondering, like, besides the prime minister, there is a deputy prime minister. What is the
Yes.
role of the deputy?
It is not clearly spelled out in the constitution, but I
Mhm.
believe his role is to assist the prime minister. For example, if the prime minister is overseas and there's a national issue here, then the deputy prime minister will need to take over. Yes.
I see. So, and I think I discussed with you earlier about the public service in Malaysia, or the
Yes.
public servants. Are they directly under the executive, and what is their role actually?
The public service would be the branch doing the groundwork. They are very, very important. And to answer the question whether the executive will exert certain control over them, I believe indirectly, yes. But the executive cannot exert control over their individual preferences. For example, there's always been this thinking that maybe a civil servant cannot vote for PAS, cannot vote for PKR, and therefore I want to say it here that that is not true. Yes. So the executive can exert certain authority over them. For example, of course, if I give you a direction, you must follow the direction, but not individual characteristics or preferences of that civil servant.
And the public services in Malaysia includes the police force, the armed forces, the education service, and also the government servants working directly under different ministerial portfolio.
Yes.
So it's a huge number of people working under the civil services.
Yes, correct.
About the prime minister, do you think the constitution allowed the state that the person has to be of a certain race, religion, or gender?
No, because in the federal constitution, it does not say that to be a prime minister, you need to be of a certain race or gender. All it says that you must be someone who is a Malaysian citizen by birth.
So we can have our Barack Obama moment in Malaysia.
Yes, definitely. I'm actually waiting for that.
So yeah, or a Hillary Clinton moment if there is one.
Definitely. I verily believe if that person is capable of leading the country, Malaysians should not be overly concerned whether he's Malay, Chinese, or Indian, or Orang Asli, as long as that person can do the job.
So, and also hopefully that, but in other countries, right, the prime minister is elected by the people, but in Malaysia, why it is elected by the party itself or the ruling government within itself?
Number one, it has already been provided by the federal constitution that it will be so. Actually, the person who can elect the prime minister is the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. It's just that traditionally, our Yang di-Pertuan Agong will elect someone who is from the ruling government. But that does not mean that actually the Yang di-Pertuan Agong cannot elect someone else, because under the constitution, all the Yang di-Pertuan Agong needs to be convinced is that this person commands the majority of the confidence in the Dewan Rakyat. But so far, we haven't seen a pretty adventurous Yang di-Pertuan Agong yet. But that does not mean that we will not have our Barack Obama moment. It might happen. And I
see.
believe it will happen.
I see. Yeah, I believe it's as well. Another question is about the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The Constitution say that the Yang di-Pertuan Agong has to consult the Conference of Rulers in appointing judges, and the Constitution also say that the Prime Minister must consult the Chief Justice before advising the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on appointing judges. So, what does consult means?
Consult is not provided for in the federal constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm not in any of these policy making or law making bodies, all I can say is consult. It does not mean obtain consent, but rather so far, when a consultation is given, it has been followed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So actually, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong need not necessarily follow the consultation. Yes, that is my reading of the federal constitution. But at the same time, as what I said, so far we haven't met a very adventurous Yang di-Pertuan Agong yet, who actually departs from the consultation. Yeah.
Interesting. So, another of my question is, the Parliament is supposed to make federal laws, but can the executive, sort of, like you said earlier, you said that executive can make laws as well, but what kind of laws, and how the process would be different from the way the Parliament make laws?
For example, under many acts that we have, the legislature will come up with a main act. For example, Act A. So, if you look at certain sections under, for example, Act A, there will be a section saying that this particular ministry, they can make subsidiary legislations as well. For example, the rules and regulations pursuant to Act A. So, under such circumstances, you do not need to go through the legislature, because the legislature has already given them the powers to make such a subsidiary legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, it is also good in a sense, because they can actually complement each other. And it's actually a faster process because you don't need to go through the legislature. And then the legislature actually controls the type of rules and regulations in which the executive can make.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm. So earlier on, you talk about ministerial responsibility and also the idea of collective responsibility. Actually, what do they really mean?
Each minister in the cabinet, he is required to answer questions in Parliament about how his or her ministry is run and about the work that the ministry does. Now, although the Constitution does not say so, it is expected that a minister must accept responsibility for the policies or mistake made by the ministry. Now, even he or she was not directly involved. Now, this is the individual ministry responsibility concept. And then the Constitution also states that the Cabinet shall be collectively responsible to the Parliament. If a member of the Cabinet publicly supports a Cabinet decision, even though he or she disagree with the decision in private, technically the member cannot criticize the decision in public and then yet remain in the Cabinet. Now, this is the concept of collective responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of collective responsibility also means that the entire Cabinet should resign if the Prime Minister ceases to command the confidence of the majority of the members in the dead one.
Any of this case ever happened before?
Not that I remember.
You see, globally, like in other countries?
Globally,
Yeah.
I believe it has happened,
Mm.
but offhand I can't tell you any.
Mm.
Yeah. Maybe in Thailand.
In Thailand?
Yes. It is somewhat similar to the situation in Thailand.
Yeah, because
actually.
right now in Thailand, not just the Prime Minister, but the whole of the Cabinet has to step down or
exactly.
resign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because after the decision given by the constitutional courts in Thailand, so the whole cabinet has to resign within.
So, yeah, so I guess there's better check and balance in Thailand in terms of how the prime ministers are being checked But when it comes to our own country, like the Prime Minister and also the whole of Cabinet, how far do you think the government has done their job?
Okay, first and foremost, we need to make a contrast between Malaysia and Thailand. If you look at what is happening in Thailand now, the people are very aggressive. They have been sitting at whatever square, and then they have been very vocal about what they want. In Malaysia, perhaps you are just not as aggressive. So that is one. That is why just now when you say that, how come in other countries it is like this, but how come in our country it's like this? I think the people plays a part in it too. And then secondly, your question on whether, in my opinion, whether our executive, they are in a way doing their job, I would say no. I'll frankly say no, because you look at the current sentiment which is going on in the country right now, all the racial statements and all the religious extremism, we can term it in other ways we want, but the fact remains that I believe the people are not comfortable. And when the rakyat is not comfortable, the executive cannot be said to be doing their job, because their job is to make the rakyat happy. Now, if you are keeping quiet over these racial sentiments which are going on in the country, I would say no. And I think our executive has to buck up and do a better job.
So, thank you very much. Thanks for your explanation on the executive power within our federal government. So, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me here.